Good morning, lovely Year 12 who've come in for revision. Okay, I'm going to start off talking about Hardy's poem At an Inn, and I'm going to start off by giving you some AO3, some context that you might be interested in. I think some of you may know this already, but it's worth going over. So Hardy is an absolute key Victorian. What makes him very interesting is obviously he goes right the way through from the Victorian age through to after the First World War. So in many ways his work moves from the Victorian age through to what we call modernism. And some of the background that's very interesting is Hardy was always a poet, but he became exclusively a poet in the 1890s after writing Jude the Obscure. Jude the Obscure was his last novel, and it dealt with premarital sex and the new woman. And there was so much criticism of his novel and of Tess of the D'Urbervilles, his earlier novel, that he stopped writing novels. But I think you're going to see in his work, by Victorian standards, it's quite daring. And this particular poem is too. It concerns a kind of aborted affair between the speaker and a lady. And many people feel that this is a reference to his friendship to Florence Henniker, who was an aristocrat. She was much richer, much more powerful than him. And Hardy actually did suggest an affair to her, and there was a meeting like this at about the time that he wrote the poem. And he actually spent the night in a hotel with her, but not sexually. Now, if we're to classify this poem within that kind of paradigm of love, I think we're going to have to classify it as unfulfilled love, isn't it? Okay. There's a kind of suggestion that there could have been a magnificent affair between them, but this never comes to fruition. And I'll conclude with it, but I will say this at the beginning. The poem is a recollection, and it is a bittersweet one. Sweet because he remembers the joy of their meeting, the sensuality, a kind of magical space that they enjoyed very temporarily. But then this was taken away from them. And therefore, much of the memory is longing. And as I said, there is almost a bitter edge to it, that this never came to fruition. This was love that never flowered or blossomed. Okay? So I'm going to start off with the title, At an Inn. Now, the interesting thing, of course, about this title is it's an inn. It's an indefinite article. It doesn't matter where the inn was. It's the memory that really counts. So the hotel, the inn itself, is completely anonymous, okay? And it begins with saying, when we as strangers sought the catering care. Well, catering care is quite a clever phrase, because obviously catering refers to the fact that they want to have something to eat. But the alliteration there of the C's as well, it kind of connotes a caringness and attentiveness. And this is where the magic of the memory comes in the first two stanzas. Okay, in them you will see that they are being treated with kindness by the people serving them. There are veiled smiles. Now, the word veiled often has a very sinister connotation, but I don't think in this context it does. Here, the veiled smiles seem to bespeak the idea that the people serving them are enjoying their romance. They see them in this quiet, private dining room as a wonderful couple, as somebody who's married or having a love affair, and given that it's Victorian, they probably see them as married. And Hardy, or the speaker, I should say, really enjoys the fact that they are mistaken as a married couple. This is where the magic comes from. You'll notice the imagery warmed. We've got friends, and we've got love's dear ends, okay? So at this point, the first stanza is warm imagery, it's pleasant imagery. There is a nice quick tempo to the stanza. There's a lot of ajaman, which shows the fact that the moment is easy and smooth and flowing. And that continues in the second stanza, and that swift sympathy with living love. Well, the sibilants here are quick, lively sibilants. And that is coupled with the L's, which we call liquids, don't we? Living love is the beautiful phrase that kind of connotes energy. There's a lovely softness to the phrase, isn't there? And the notion living, of course, that it is alive, that it's organic. And that fits in with the verb quickens the world. This seems to refer to the Elizabethan and metaphysical habit of seeing something small, a microcosm, the personal, and then relating it to something which is cosmic or metaphysical. Do you all get what I mean by that? Okay. So it means that you have this small little personal scene, but it is actually compared to the spheres. Now, some of you will know that in Elizabethan times they taught that the moon and the stars rotated around the earth in spheres, invisible spheres. And as these spheres spun, there was music. So it's a notion that this love affair betokens cosmic harmony. Now, I think Hardy clearly realizes that this is not the case. This is not the Elizabethan age. He doesn't believe in the spheres, but he's reaching for a poetic metaphor to show how the whole cosmos for him is in harmony at this time. So he's using this metaphysical cosmic imagery, and he's coupling that with the semantic field of religion, because he says that the spheres made them out ministers, priests. Now, once again, that seems to sort of symbolize the fact that they're almost married, okay? Even if it's not marriage, what we're talking about is the idea of absolute harmony. And you'll see the clever use of M's here, made ministers, moved as well. All of them showing this kind of harmonious movement. And then there's this almost gasp, isn't there? Ah, God, that bliss like theirs would flush our day. By flush, it's an interesting use of word, isn't it? Fill our day. That strong fricative flush also seems to suggest just absolute happiness, a moment of cosmic style happiness. And that actually extends into stanza 3. Have a look here with me. And we were left alone as love's own pair. Interesting that he doesn't break the mood between stanzas. He's actually going to break the mood amid stanza. This semicolon here, this marks Marxisora here, really does show a very big transition in the poem. Because listen to the tone. Yet, never the love light shone between us there. At that moment, I wouldn't say that tone is despair. The yet does show us that he's going to swerve away from all of this happiness and cosmic joy. But even here, I think it's the second but that is the key one. But that which chilled the breath of afternoon and palsied unto death the pain fly's tune. Well, look at the difference in mood between this one and the ones above. There we had the spheres, we had this easy, fluent, quick movement. What happens now? This word chilled introduces a new pattern of imagery. And what we're going to see here is we have chilled, if I can just move my book, along with palsied, along with lingered, along with numbed. All of them belong to the same kind of semantic field, don't they? Of cold, of staticness, of illness, and of negativity. So we have really a very sharp juxtaposition between these two worlds, don't we? Even the fly, the pain fly's tune, is silenced. So this use of pathetic fallacy is very evocative in showing how the mood chills, okay? And why does the mood chill? Well, it says here, the kiss their zeal foretold, and now deemed come, came not. So he felt as though there was going to be a natural transition movement to something physical, to a kiss, to something that is loving, that's something that is sexual and erotic. But instead, we have the personification of love, and to linger means to wander, to not make progress, isn't it? And this is where the note of bitterness comes. And hence the rhetorical question, why cast he on our port a bloom not ours. Interesting enough, there's actually a mixed metaphor, because port being a ship and bloom being to do with nature and flowers, etc. And he moves on to say, why shaped us for his sport in after hours? So you've got the double rhetorical question, where you could argue that this is an interrogative, angry kind of question. And here it is, love has been personified, not being personified as something pleasant, but as being personified like a Grecian god. Some of you will know that in Greek tragedy, the gods actually play with people, play with heroes. And here it's almost like he's thinking that love has tantalized them, shown him what he could have, only to withdraw it. So I'm going to put it to you there that there's a potential there for that being read in quite a bitter tone, an angry tone, yeah? And he goes on to say, as we seemed, we were not that day afar here. Afar being a really key word as well. Because all of a sudden, they're going to move from that imagery of closeness, and you're going to see the imagery becomes that of distance, doesn't it? We aching are, O severing sea and land, O laws of man. Now, severing is really interesting, isn't it? Okay, because to sever means to cut in half. You have this harsh, angry sibilant. Again, you have the exaggerated, the hyperbole of the cosmic style imagery. Severed sea and land. Well, he's showing the separation between this on this grand scale, almost epic scale. O laws of men, ere death, once let us stand as we stood then. And it ends again with the O, a cry of emotion here, where he's begging and asking for them to return to the past. When in this section here, we know in the first two stanzas, they had this closeness, and he's calling upon it, but I think he's calling upon it in quite a futile way, with the knowledge that they cannot return to this magical moment here. And that as we stood then is that kind of note of longing, isn't it? And you could say it's almost like he's relishing the memory. So the memory, again, I'm going to come back to it being a bittersweet memory, isn't it? Okay. Because on the one hand, there's full of this kind of richness, this sensual richness of this very brief moment that they enjoyed in this private space. But that element seems to be overwhelmed by the tone of regret, the knowledge that the love was never fulfilled, and that it was actually a fake kind of occasion in many ways, because it didn't bloom, it palsied instead. Now, just to talk a little bit about form and structure here, I think that's quite interesting, because you'll see that it's a very strict form. The first line is a trimeter. That means that there are three stresses. And the second line is a dimeter. And that is strictly held to in the first three stanzas, but really throughout it.
Can you explain like the whole trimeter?
Okay. Trimeter just means that there are three beats. When we as strangers sought, when we as strangers sought, there are three beats. Okay? The catering care, 2 beats. So we're going from 3 beats to 2 beats. Rather than worrying about that, I think it's much more interesting that we actually say, why is there strict form? And it seems to me the best interpretation of why there is this strict form is, even though the memory is very emotional to him, he is controlling his emotion very carefully, in order to give him clarity of this memory. It's a distant memory now, and he's thinking about it. It's almost like Wordsworth's definition of poetry, emotion recollected in tranquility. And so here he's actually has control over his emotions. When he ends here, I think that control begins to collapse a little bit. Oh, severing sea and land. So we have that again, that kind of exaggeration, that epicness. And oh, laws of men. So we have 2 lines in which he cries out. And then there's this very strong tone of yearning. Ere death, once let us stand, as we stood then. It's almost like he's trying to fight against death and longing to return to this earlier moment here.